Well, we're working on developing next gen alternatives to traditionally animal-based materials. So leather, wool, silk, down, fur, and exotic skins. And the reason is because those materials tend to be the worst for the environment. And obviously a lot of animals are harmed in that production process. So when we're talking about animals, it's about 3.6 billion land animals that are used for their skin, fur, or feathers, and 1 trillion silkworms that are boiled alive every year for silk production. And then if you look at the materials that are worse for the environment, you actually get 4 out of the top 5 from animal-based sources. So silk, leather, alpaca wool, and traditional wool.
Definitely. I remember when I was in Peru, alpaca wool was the big thing there. You see it in the shops. And one of the things when I was talking to Lean during her interview is that you can't connect the dots from when you're at the store buying something versus the original source of it. So you talk about 1 trillion silkworms are boiled each year. So what's an example of a product that someone would buy? And can you kind of backtrace it to what happens along the process? So maybe people can see that clearly if they're not vegan yet.
Mhm. Yeah, so if you're talking about silk, I mean, anything that's made with silk, whether it's scarves or shirts, all of that comes from traditionally sourced silk. There's a small portion of the silk market that's called ahimsa silk, which the animal is actually allowed to emerge from the cocoon. But with the vast majority of silk, what they do is they have to boil the silkworms alive within that cocoon in order to ensure that the silk strands aren't broken when the moth emerges from the cocoon. So like with all animal agriculture, it's a commodity and they need to reduce that cost of that product as much as possible. And actually, unfortunately, allowing those silkworms to live reduces their ability to have, you know, one single strand of silk, and it's much more expensive to harvest that silk.
Well, yeah, it's amazing to see everything behind the scenes where, from the vegan point of view, we see the documentaries, we see it, but until that point, it's just nobody knows. It's called silk, it's on a shirt, and you don't really know what it is. And then
Yeah,
I
and
know
it's
we
hard
spend,
to even imagine 1 trillion silkworms. I mean, it's really hard to, you know, wrap your mind around those type of numbers.
yeah, when I saw that statistic on your website, I just didn't believe it at first. I'm like, wow, like we're used to seeing billions of animals being slaughtered for food per year, but this is trillions and
Mhm.
it's out of this world.
Mhm.
And then yeah, I know we spent like 5 minutes going through the questions beforehand. Of course, I think of one as you speak, so hopefully you could roll with this.
Sure,
So pretty
nice.
much, why is it in place in the first place? So silk is an example. Like, why is it there? Is it because of the look, because of the strength, because of different things? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so most of the materials that come from animals we've been using for thousands of years as a species, right? And so I think with most products like leather or wool, we originally started to kill those animals for their meat and then found, you know, their hair or their skin as a really useful byproduct to keep us warm and dry. With silk, it really is a beautiful material. You have a very, very strong strand that can be woven very easily into a very, very soft, supple, and warm material. And so I think the thing that we're very excited about from an innovation standpoint is we're not using these animal source materials because they're necessarily the best for our needs. It just happens to be something we've been using for thousands of years. And we now have this opportunity to use these new technologies to create something that's even better, that's more durable, that's more water resistance, that's more heat retention. And so that's where we think there's so much opportunity in this space.
Absolutely. When I speak with Aline, she said the leather on couches could absorb in your skin for up to 20 years after, and then now you're making mango leather, different things like that. So, could transition and talk about what your organization is, your background, what you're doing, and your goals?
Sure. So I guess let me start with my background. I'm actually a lawyer. I worked at a big San Francisco, New York law firm for about 8 years, mostly working on unrelated issues, securities litigation, white collar defense. But as part of that, I did my pro bono work for animal protection organizations. I'd actually gone to law school knowing that I wanted to help animals with my law degree. And I worked with big organizations like the Humane Society of the United States suing factory farms for environmental violations. The issue is we actually always won and very little changed in the system. So the insurance companies would pay for the lawyers a lot of the times. The fines weren't big enough to really impact their business. And I was frustrated with my ability to affect change. And so I ended up going into nonprofit management, thinking that I could use my skills to better strategize on how to improve how we were trying to affect a benefit for animals. The organization that really turned me around was the Good Food Institute. So I started there in 2017, very early in their development. And I ran all of the international operations. And I saw how successful those programs were. And GFI's theory of change, which is very similar to ours, is let's use the marketplace, right? Rather than fighting with consumers and asking them to give up something they love, whether it's meat or leather, we're saying, hey, here's something better. Here's something that meets your needs, is at price parity, is available to you, but you're not giving up anything. And to me, that really resonated. And I thought GFI was very successful in those programs. So I left last year, a little over almost 2 years ago, to basically create the GFI for vegan materials. So we're using a very similar idea, but for all those animal materials I've mentioned.
That's very great and like a very smart approach because making the food analogy again, where my family, they will not eat vegan foods.
Mm-hmm.
Unknowingly, they eat vegetables and pasta, but like if it's an old school vegan burger, they wouldn't eat it. Then
Mm-hmm.
with the Beyond Meat, there's the Beyond Burger and then the Beyond Italian Sausage.
Mm-hmm.
Where I cooked it, my family ate it, and they said, "Wow, this actually tastes good." So myself, from a marketing business background, I understand that if something's better and tastes good or looks better, then that's what drives consumers there. So to answer my question, I was going to ask from later on in the interview. So it's amazing. So can you talk more about the solutions that the are being made right now? So different types of manufacturing of vegan materials, different examples, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a nascent industry. So there's not a lot on the market that as a consumer you can buy right now. Um, there's a lot of technology that's developing that we're really excited about. And it does overlap a lot with the food space. So things like precision fermentation, where you actually take the collagen from an animal and you insert that into a bacteria or yeast, and then the bacteria and yeast grows that collagen, which is the majority of what makes up skin cells. And we can create that animal skin through this fermentation process. The same with cultivation. So as we've seen in the meat space, like Singapore just approved the sale of cultivated meat. Benjamin Netanyahu just ate some cultivated meat in Israel and now wants to put more Israeli government funds behind it. That type of technology applies to materials as well. And so to us, it's more not about what's on the market right now, because there is very little that consumers can buy, but that this is the beginning of an industry with a lot of opportunity for investors, a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs, and a lot of opportunities for brands to get in at the beginning of this industry and really source and develop these more sustainable materials.
That's amazing. Yeah, with my previous interview with Paul Shapiro, he talked about the clean meat, the cellular-based agriculture industry, and then he made one comment during there where you can make meat better than this today without killing animals. Where the example is, imagine a hamburger without the saturated fat, tastes the same, tastes better. but you put omega-3s in there. So all of a sudden, eating the hamburger lowers cholesterol as opposed to raising it.
Mhm.
And as an entrepreneur myself, I've been through many different businesses in plant-based space and before. And that's something I would love to act on. So, kind of a follow up question is what opportunities are there for people such as myself or other innovators that maybe it's on the cutting edge or something you see in the future that'd be an opportunity in the space?
Mhm. Yeah, actually, this is a great question for us because that's exactly what we want to do is we want to create these new businesses. Our belief is that the more competition in the market, the better for everyone. Like the rising tide lifts all boats. And so if you have a lot of entrepreneurs and investors and scientists who are working on this technology, who are creating new companies, that's going to keep pushing everybody else to be better. So not only to improve the performance of materials, to improve the aesthetic, to also increase the sustainability, right? There's no materials that are really perfect, right? We're working on progress, not perfection. What can we do to make these materials better for the environment and everyone else? So I think, for any entrepreneurs who are listening, that it really is about just creating new companies and getting into this space. And I can say, if you look on our website, there's very few options in wool. There's actually none in exotic skins. And a lot of the fur companies are actually using petroleum-based products. So there's a lot of opportunity there as well.
Definitely. Then I read somewhere like spider web. I guess spider webs are like really
Yeah.
strong materials. Anybody working on that yet that you know aware of? Some using that for maybe, I don't know, defense purposes or anything else?
Yeah, there are a number of companies who are using spider silk, or at least the collagen from spider silk, to create silk replacements. And I'm going to forget the exact statistics, but silk thread is so much. A spider silk thread is a lot stronger than silkworm thread. So there's a lot of potential, like you'd mentioned, that we can really improve on this technology. You can't harvest spider silk. Like imagine having a factory with a lot of spiders and trying to, extract the silk from spiders. That's really untenable, right? But using this type of technology, we can take that spider silk and grow it and have new products that are so much stronger than traditional source silk.
That's amazing. I'm always thinking of different things it could be used for, either it's fashion or something where else that you wouldn't even know about. So I love innovation like that.
Especially in this last year, we've seen a lot of partnerships between brands in the automotive and fashion space, working with these material companies. So Bolt Threads, for example, is partnered with Lululemon and Kering and Adidas and Stella McCartney on their next gen leather. We also saw Bentley that's partnered with Vegea, that they make a leather out of the waste from the wine industry. And then some spider silk companies and North Face. So there are a lot. Oh, another one, natural fiber welding and Ralph Lauren. So we're seeing a lot of this development, and I just see more and more of this happening. And what's not public that we see is we've met with, let me see, 38 brands at this point that all are looking at these next gen materials. They're actively looking at investment opportunities, sourcing opportunities, just providing advice to these material companies to get this industry started. So I think we're just going to see a lot more development within the next few years. And we do know a couple of brands that are coming to market with products in fall 2021.
That's great. Then you talked about brand interest, where you work with some of the larger brands where they replace their animal products with the vegan materials. But
Mhm.
for, I guess, startup entrepreneurs who maybe want to make a vegan handbag, things like that, do you want to talk more about brand interest there or what someone in that position could do to, if they want to reach out, find suppliers?
That's, I will say, unfortunately, that's pretty difficult just because there's so few products on the market right now. And by products, I mean there's very few material options on the market right now. And because it's a new industry, the materials tend to be more expensive. And so we've seen, at least with the smaller brands that don't have a really high price point, these materials are really out of their price range, or the big brands already have exclusivity agreements with the material companies. And so I think it is going to be, at least a year or two before the smaller brands have access to these type of materials.
Definitely. It sounds like the real opportunity right now is being the innovation of the materials that could work with the brands. It's
Yes,
amazing. And you
a
talk
lot
about
of opportunity to be a material company in this space.
great. And you want to talk about consumer interest, how that has changed over the years?
Yeah, so this really shocked me. We actually did two consumer research studies, one in the United States and one in China. And these are independent consumers. These aren't our friends who we reached out to. We actually used an independent survey provider through Amazon's MTurk. And we surveyed about over 500 consumers in the United States and 500 in China. And what I can say is actually 55% of US consumers would prefer purchasing a leather alternative to an animal source leather. And it's even higher in China. China, it's 66% of Chinese consumers would prefer a leather alternative. And then when you start to look at like the lab grown leather, like you were talking about Paul Shapiro and the cultivated meat, it's much higher in the material space than it is in the food space. So in the United States, 76% of consumers are likely to purchase leather grown from cells in a factory, and it's 80% in China. So it's really high. Consumer interest in this area is much higher than I expected. And I could give you some reasons why we think that is. I mean, number one, consumers aren't as tied to the material as they are food, right? This isn't a cultural, it's not a cultural attachment. They don't make this decision 3 times a day. They haven't had a recipe passed down by their grandmother for generations. This is something where they go out and they buy bags, they buy shoes, they buy sweaters. That's a purchase they make every few months. Second, people like technology in their cars. They like technology in their clothing. They don't always like technology in their food. And so I think people are much more willing to try these materials that they can feel. They can look at the bag. There's not so much of a commitment in trying those materials as there are with food when you actually need to consume it and put it into your body. And then finally, people know they use non-animal materials all the time, right? I think you'd mentioned a little bit about your family beforehand, where most people say, oh, I don't eat vegan food. So you don't eat vegetables? You don't eat fruit? Like you don't eat bread? Like all of that is vegan food. They're just not really aware of that in that context. When you talk about materials, people are used to having cotton. They're used to having, polyester. They know that they're using non-animal based materials. And so they're not as committed to not changing.
Definitely. And one person I definitely want to interview for the documentary, I think it's Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote The Tipping Point. I don't know if you ever read that book, but
I know.
I guess I forget the exact names, but the small portion of society are like the radicals, the one who'll do before anyone else, come the outcasts.
Yeah.
Then the early adopters, where I kind of fall into that category, being an entrepreneur. I just like to be on the cutting edge where it's a certain point of people. And once it reaches a certain point, then most people do it.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to what you said about the lab grown meat, where myself personally, I won't go back to eating animal products, but because I'm involved in the space, just the thought of eating lab grown meat, it's aside from the aspect of it, because I haven't eaten meat in 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
is it safe? Is it good long term? It's something new, where it's something I'm not 100% yet, where it's easier to make the decision with materials, where it's like, oh, there's no fears out of it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's probably one of the reasons why I see the studies going up, like you said. Yeah, in your opinion, what drives market change? So what's going to drive the increase of a desire for these type of materials?
Yeah, I mean, for that, I think it actually really depends on the generation. So when we look at Gen Z, they really do care about animal free and environmentally sustainable materials, right? And obviously, all of these next gen materials meet those qualifications. I do think with older generations who are becoming more aware of these issues, it is going to be just a price and scale and performance issue. right? Our belief is really that once these materials are at price parity with traditionally or animal source materials, the quality and the aesthetics are the same, right? So you look at a next gen leather bag and it looks just like you think a traditional animal source leather bag looks like. And you can buy it wherever you purchase your clothing, your shoes, that people will start to buy these alternative materials. And the exciting thing that we're seeing in this industry as well is that the fashion and automotive companies are really trying to be, the most of them are really trying to be more sustainable. And so this, at least for the material companies, it is a B2B, right? You as a consumer are not going to just purchase, right, a yard of leather to make your own, products at home like you would when you buy the meat from Safeway or Whole Foods, right? You are buying from another brand. And so we need those big brands choosing these materials to then create those products for the consumers. And that's where I think I'm seeing the most interest is the brands want these materials because they're trying to meet pretty ambitious sustainability goals.
Definitely. And when I really think about the economics of it, like you were saying, where when companies could order like hundreds of thousands of units of something, the price naturally goes down. When the
Mhm.
innovation, they could order really large bulk, that's when the price goes down, but it's based on consumer demand. So it's like the price is high now. So it's like we have to get the cost down and then production up. So it
Mhm.
seems like the bigger companies are the way to go because once those contracts are in place, then the price goes down for other smaller companies to work in. So it
Mhm.
really comes down to having consumers really let the companies be aware of this is what I want to purchase.
Mhm.
So that's the biggest thing I'm coming back to with the documentary is consumer behavior,
Mhm.
where if you are watching this or you're a vegan and you want to have a certain brand create a product, don't just wait for it. Email them, tag on social media saying,
Mhm.
hey, we'd love the vegan version of this. Can you look
Mhm.
into this? And the more people that do that, companies listen because that's where the dollars come in and keeps them going.
Yeah, no, I think so, and I think we're going to keep seeing a lot of these partnerships in the space as well. So, the more everyone's reading, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times about these new like Bentley Vigea partnerships, that's just going to spur more brand interest to look into the space.
Definitely going towards the bottom of my questions. I guess your organization, anybody watching this, is there anyone, any help you need, anyone you'd like to be in contact with or following you on social, your website, etc.?
Yeah, no, we'd love for people to follow us on social media and look at all the resources on our website. I think if you're a general consumer, our Instagram or Facebook pages are probably the most useful. We are putting out a lot more of these type of opportunities. So when you can purchase these materials, these products made by these materials, we'll be pushing those out through social media. If you are a material company or you're an investor or brand, we'd love to talk to you, right? Because I think there's a lot that we could do as a nonprofit to help for free in really boosting this entire industry. And then if you happen to have funds that you'd like to support a great cause, we would love donations as well. That's how
Awesome.
we
And your
do it.
website?
It's materialinnovation.org.